I'm talking about the 70s, and Kim Strassel comes along. Kim, you're just on Fox talking about the Biden malaise. Congratulations. It's today pub day.
Thank you. Today is pub day. It's a big moment.
Well, I've read this book twice. I told everyone yesterday, I read it when it came out to blurb it. I don't blurb a lot of books, but I love the Biden malaise so much. I have 3 pages of notes. So we're going to do 3 segments today. Kim, let me start by asking you, how much did you know about the Biden years? Because you're too young to have lived them. The story about your mother in the gas station is very funny. But other than that emotional experience, how much did you have to go back and research to learn about the Carter years?
A lot. I have never done as much research as I had to do for this book because, not to give away how old I am, but I was still in my single digits even as he left office. And, it's interesting, Hugh, he's not a well-researched, kind of much written about president. And so actually it was a little challenging finding some of the information as well, too.
The best book about him has to do with the Camp David Accords. And I want Democrats to know, you give him his due on that. You're not harsh about that. Explain to people, you're just out to compare and contrast. You're not out to ruin either man.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's just talking about some of these very eerie similarities that obviously are echoed over these 44 years that separate these presidents. And it really is quite striking. You have inflation, overspending, over-reliance on government. You have foreign policy debacles other than Camp David. That was a very good moment for Jimmy Carter. You've got same levels of crime now in the country. You have the same issue when it comes to energy and energy policy and gas prices. So it's really quite striking how similar these two men are. But one of the points of the book is to note that it's a little unfair, in fact, to Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter, he inherited a lot of his messes. He made a lot of them worse, let's be clear. But this was a time of the great inflation around the globe. We'd already had a global oil shock. So he was trying to dig out from some of that. He didn't manage to do it successfully. Joe Biden, by contrast, he was dealt a pretty good hand, and he nonetheless managed to create a number of these problems through his own actions.
We're going to walk through this, but I was glad at the beginning of the book, and I'd forgotten this between the first read and the second. Maybe you added it. Maybe it was said subsequent to when I first read the book. Senator Cotton has said Jimmy Carter has a defamation case against Joe Biden for people who compare him to him because Joe Biden's worse. Now, what I like about this book, I've advised my audience to buy 2 copies, one for themselves and one for their favorite Democrat in their life, because it's not hysterical. It's a reasonable, remarkable review of what President Biden has done. And do you get that from a lot of people? Thank you for just sticking to the facts.
Well, I tried really hard, because look, the facts are simply the facts. And the reality is, to elaborate on that point a little bit, this isn't about trashing on either men. It's simply pointing out that when people make these comparisons, as much as they are there on a top level, the decisions that both men made, there are some really notable contrasts, and where they started from, there are some notable contrasts. And I think it's worthwhile sorting those things out so that we as a country, as a nation, as a people, can understand why things go wrong, because there's different reasons why things go wrong. Both of these presidents outwardly have these situations, but there were very different reasons for it.
Let's start with energy, because early in the book you point out that when President Biden took over, for the first time since 1952, America became a net energy exporter, which is a big deal for GDP, for quality of life, for security, national security. And by the time we are 2.5 years into Biden, we are energy dependent again. And we are putting ourselves so deep into a hole with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which you talk about at the end of the book. Would you explain to people how Joe Biden managed to turn a great situation south in 30 months?
Yeah, it's remarkable, Hugh, because the other thing that we were was we had become the world's swing producer. That meant that we finally had some ability to influence international prices, something we'd never done before. And look, this is just straightforward. This is Joe Biden. He's very much listened to his climate left. They believe that oil and gas needs to stay in the ground. We can't use it. And I have been surprised at the degree to which he has sort of blocked out what's clear energy reality, right? As you note, energy, cheap energy is the lifeblood of an economy. If you do not have it, you don't have stability. You're weaker from a foreign policy standpoint because you're reliant on other, sometimes bad guys in the world to get it. And we are nowhere near, as people understand, energy independence in terms of renewable energy. I mean, we've been working on this project now for decades, and it still makes up only a small fraction of our energy resources. And yet, as you know, one of his first acts was to kill the Keystone Pipeline. We've had him raising, essentially making it much harder for people to drill around the country on federal lands, offshore, other projects or infrastructure. And mostly sending the very clear message to domestic oil and gas producers that they are in the targets. And that in itself is a message that causes people to pull back, not decide to make the investments they need to make, because oil and gas production is a long-term thing. So you need to be making those commitments for the kind of, production you're going to be doing down the road. And we have simply seen a fall off in our energy production. And we are no longer in that sweet spot that we were just a couple of years ago. And it's astonishing. And that is the real reason behind those high gas prices you saw. The president kept talking about Putin's price hike, but energy prices were going up long before Putin invaded Ukraine. This was a result of domestic policies.
Now, Kim, you are one of America's most popular columnists, so you probably don't know the lunch rule. You've got to say the name of the book 7 times in every segment, or people don't remember the Biden Malaise. So keep saying, as I make a point in the Biden Malaise. 2 minutes to the break, so I want to go back to the Strategic Petroleum, because you come back to it at the end. The abuse of the Strategic Petroleum is a crossover issue. Not only is it bad for our energy industry to rely on a substitute, that which is already out of the ground, it's very dangerous. People don't understand that. If we get a Pearl Harbor, and it's real, hypersonic missiles make it real, we need that oil.
That is why we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It is supposed to sit there. And nothing in the high energy prices that we had, thanks to some of these Biden policies, counted as an emergency, or the sort of thing that you would use as a legitimate justification to actually draw that down. And by the way, also, it makes a marginal difference in terms of prices. We're talking maybe pennies on the price of gasoline. It really doesn't make a difference. And so what we've done is put ourselves at enormous risk, and it's going to take us years to try to fill that back up again. And we are now utterly unprepared if we have the sort of crisis that you mentioned.
Yeah, their energy policy is so bad on every level. I'm going to let people read the book. When we come back from break, Kimberly, we're going to talk about inflation. And in the third segment, we're going to do the national security parallels. But just to get started, what's the misery index so that people understand when we come back and compare and contrast?
A combination of unemployment and inflation and misery index under Biden is right up there with where it was in Jimmy Carter, which is really saying something.
When we come back, we're going to unpack the inflation angle, because if there is one stunning parallel, when I bought my first house with my wonderful wife, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, we paid a 12.5% 30-year fixed mortgage because of Jimmy Carter. And people are out there right now buying 7% mortgages. That wasn't that way 2 years ago. Difference, Trump to Biden. Kim Strassel will be right back. The Biden Malaise, available in bookstores today and at Amazon. I just tweeted it out. Go get the Biden Malaise. I'm coming back with Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal right after this. Stay tuned. Maybe the archetypal song from the 1970s, America, from the Carter years, running on empty. Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal has written this magnificent new book, The Biden Malaise, and I'm playing 70s bumps because of the Biden Malaise, harkening back to the Carter years. Kimberly, my first producer in radio was a guy named Mark Germain, and he was known as Mr. KABC and Mr. KFI. He used to call me the man so nice, they nearly named him twice. And this is the book so nice. I've read it twice. I don't usually reread books, but I did so because it's persuasive And I want people to buy the Biden Malaise to give to Democrats so that they don't react emotionally to this moment. And before we go to inflation, I want to let them know you are fair as the day is long. You admit that Jimmy Carter started deregulation in airlines, in trucking, in natural gas, and that the super regulators have arrived under Biden. And you use one of my favorite examples, because I was an endangered species lawyer for 30 years before I retired, the lesser prairie chicken. Would you tell people how Biden has just put all the regulatory administrative state on steroids?
Yeah, and this is a really great comparison in the book, Hugh, in the Biden Malaise. See, look, I'm mentioning it now, which is that Jimmy Carter belonged to a different time and a different party. And the important thing is that the Democratic Party was not nearly as hostile to corporate America, to business, as it is now. And so there were key sectors of the economy that were still being run out of Washington. As you mentioned, airlines, railroads, the trucking industry. And his Congress and that president actually took the first steps toward really deregulating them. Now, they piled on other regulations, but contrast this to the Biden administration, which has been very much about having these super regulators who are targeting the corporate America as a whole.
Oops, we lost the signal. We lost the picture. You're back. You're back. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay. I don't know where we got to, but
we got to that Carter did some.
Carter did something. Contrast this to the Biden administration, which is the whole attitude is that corporate America is bad. Everything that they're trying to do is bad. And so what they've done is very clever too, Hugh, is that rather than just target industries piece by piece, department by department, although they've done that too, they've also put these people in charge. For instance, Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, Gary Gensler at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the folks at the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And what they're doing is targeting entire industries with rules that span the entire economy. And on top of that, you've got folks like Regan at the EPA that are revving up, or at the Fish and Wildlife Service that are revving up Endangered Species Act, locking up entire pieces of the country to oil and gas drilling, to farming, to meat production. Because when you use statutes like that, you can say, well, everywhere where there's habitat where this potential animal might live, no one can touch it anymore.
Oh, what a flashback for me, Kim. In your Jolly Green Giant chapter on page 55, I wrote down, they are using enforcement, not rulemaking. Now, in the Endangered Species Act, every quote taking, which is a highly technical definition, is 1 year in jail and a $100,000 fine. So you don't go near it. I think it's a temporary taking. It ought to be unconstitutional. But after you finish the book, they shut down the twin mines in Minnesota. That's where we have all our rare earth minerals. We are now dependent on the Chinese Communist Party because of these people. And they don't even look twice in the mirror because nobody knows what's going on in the other agencies. They're all out there doing enforcement.
Yep, we did it to the Pebble Mine in Alaska as well. And think about the backward nature of this, Hugh. It's just that this is the same administration that says we need to be building electric vehicles and batteries, and we need to be doing it in the United States. But as you say, they will not allow us to actually drill for those products here. The other weirdness of this is that we do it cleaner, better, and at higher standards than anywhere else in the world. So if you really care about the environment, and you really believe in the things the Biden administration says they believe in, we ought to be doubling down on this stuff in this country. Instead, they are issuing regulations after regulations that, again, send the message to corporate America, don't invest, don't grow your workforce, because no one knows where they're going to get taxed or hit on regulation next.
Let's start on inflation. We won't be able to finish it until the next segment, which people can listen on the podcast today and tomorrow. But in 30 seconds, what is the cause of inflation, Kimberly Strassel?
Well, two sides of it. We just touched on one, which is regulation, because that really crimps supply. Then you don't have enough of that. At the same time, they've been pushing out demand by issuing huge amounts of money out to the country and spending and transfers to people. And then, of course, too loose of money supply for too long. There are too many dollars out there chasing not enough goods.
And we're going to come back after the break on the podcast, and I'll play it in the first hour again tomorrow, what the inflation looks like. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it does not have to be that way. All the receipts are in the Biden Malaise by Kimberly Strassel, bestseller already. One of America's favorite columnists, the equal of any of them at working hard at her craft. And she does that with this book, The Biden Malaise, as well. Go and get it. Buy 2 copies, one for yourself and one for your favorite reasonable Democrat. I mean, you're not going to move a progressive ideologue, but if somebody's in the middle, they will be moved by Kimberly Strassel's The Biden Malaise. I'll be right back with Kimberly. If you're listening on the podcast, don't go anywhere. If you're listening on the podcast today or you're listening to the radio show tomorrow, you will hear this third segment. Kimberly, let's talk a little bit about the cheaters in chief, and then we'll go to inflation. I just love that phrase because it does capture their approach. Jimmy Carter was nicer about it. Biden is an angry old man, but what do you mean by cheaters in chief? Finger waggers.
You know, when we look at Joe Biden's really low approval ratings, and Carter had them as well too. Part of that was mismanagement of the economy and the fallout from that. But part of it was that people just really resented the way that they managed themselves and lectured and hectored the country. You know, I mean, Jimmy Carter was infamous. He was constantly telling people to turn down their thermostats and live a more prudent life, not be quite so materialistic. And obviously his infamous Malaise speech in 1979, he never used the word, but he basically accused America of not having enough confidence, not being sunny enough, and not getting with his program. And people didn't like that. And Biden's been very similar, whether it's our attitudes and behavior during COVID, the constant lecturing to mask up, et cetera. Also, you know, shaking his finger at us and whispering about how people need to pay their fair share. You know, Americans want a president who are going to lead, who have an optimistic view of the country, and who are inclusive. Both of those men very much managed to suggest if you were not on board with their agenda, that you were somehow morally failing.
Now, when Carter arrived in office, he was 52. And he was naive, but he was very smart. He's a nuclear engineer, a very smart man, but he was inexperienced and he didn't have a team. And that's part of the reason Ham Jordan was not the guy. A lot of his people were not the guy. He had Lance, the banker, bad start. Joe Biden does not have that excuse because he's been around D.C. since 1972. He ought to have had a team. And as you point out, and on page 47, most of his picks amounted to Biden's activists, academics, and ideologues. These are not centrist Democrats. There are no centrist Democrats. That's part of the problem, is that he got pulled to the left. He's always been a go-along to get-along guy, and as they've gone to the left, he's gone to... I asked Byron York today, or maybe it was David Drucker, who is like Jimmy Carter today? And there aren't any Southern moderate Democrats left. There is no Lawton Chiles. There is no Dale Bumpers. There is no Bill Clinton.
Nope, and that's another contrast. You know, one of the reasons Jimmy Carter actually had a tough time in Washington. He managed to miff his own party. One of the reasons he had struggled getting his agenda across is because his party was very divided at the time. You know, there were Southern Democrats, there were Northeast liberals. There was a lot of give and take, and he was always bopping around between those groups. But there was a lot of resentment there. You know, Joe Biden is totally catered to what I guess we would call the ascendant part of the party. But I don't even want to use that word anymore, Hugh, because I don't know where the rest of the party is. You've got a Joe Manchin, but the rest of the party spends most of their time beating him up for his policies and his views. And so that is one of the problems, is that we don't have any diversity in the Democratic Party anymore, and it leads to some of these challenges.
Let's talk about a Biden-specific couple of problems in the Biden Malaise from late in the book, page 181. I love this, by the way. As Ian Forster said, you know you're being influenced when you read something and say, I might have written that myself if I had more time. All right. The arrogance, the inability to acknowledge fault explains why Biden has never helped himself by firing, pivoting, or opting for a reset. That's so on the nose, Kimberly. He does not admit error. None of them ever do. Donald Trump didn't either. But, when you've screwed up, a lot of people, they expect you to say, mistake, I'll do better. Biden just digs in. They keep digging.
Yep. And, Jimmy Carter, give him credit. By the end of his term, he had changed his mind on defense budgets. He was putting money back into that. He fired half of his cabinet at one point because he wanted to send the message he recognized that there were problems. Biden's never done that. He's never reset at all. And, you were making the point about how he's been there forever. That's the other really stunning aspect of this is it's not just that Joe Biden began with a better hand, but he was actually, the guy was in the Senate when Jimmy Carter was president. He had all the lessons of Jimmy Carter to know what not to do. And by the way, not just Jimmy Carter, but all subsequent presidents, including Ronald Reagan and the amazing economic growth that we had during that period of time. And so he should have known. He was warned by a number of people, but he wouldn't back down. And now he refuses to change course, even though what is ailing the country is so glaringly obvious to so many economists and onlookers.
Kimberly, you've got your own editors, you've got your own ideas, but if you write any columns that derive from the Biden Malaise, I hope you will take one from your border chapter. Again, this is one of those things where I wish I'd written it myself, but you wrote it. Signal, and they will come. Page 133. You're talking about the border collapse. Jimmy Carter was not this bad. No one has been this bad. What do you mean by signal, and they will come?
Well, it is a striking contrast. I don't think a lot of people know this, that these are the only two real modern presidents that had a flood of immigration and a border problem because of the words they spoke. In the case of Jimmy Carter, it was the Mariel boat lift from Cuba. Now, obviously, the Cuban Fidel Castro played a big part in that. He was trying to cause mischief. But Jimmy Carter at one point gives a speech. There had already been a deal to how many people were going to come as refugees to the United States. And he says, no, but we're a nation. We open our arms. We should basically he said, we should let them all in. And guess what? The next day, they were all on boats coming. It was a dramatic problem for Florida and other places, caused a lot of issues. Same thing, Joe Biden. He was so intent on contrasting himself with Donald Trump that they threw out even sensible immigration policies, including ones, for instance, that Barack Obama had very much had in place when he was president. But mostly it was this constant message from Biden. Things are going to be different. If you get across, you're going to be able to stay. That was the attitude from the White House. And that is what is behind the floods of migrants and caravans we've seen coming over the border.
I couldn't agree more. I want to make sure we cover two more things, both how to change this, but I also want to focus on crime because it is ever present in people's minds. This is not the way it was until fairly recently. When I first moved to New York in 1980, I didn't know where to move. I didn't know which streets I could go down. And it was that dangerous. You could get shot or mugged on any street. Now in LA, you have to be careful wherever you go. In fact, people are not feeling safe in their homes. The last time we had this kind of a crime, it's not just a panic, it's a crime reality, were the Carter years. Do you see Joe Biden doing anything on this front?
No, and by the way, Hugh, I'm actually in New York at the moment to talk about this book. I haven't been here in a couple of years, and I can't believe how much has changed and how much edgier this city is and how unsafe you feel walking down the streets again. It hasn't been that way, in my experience, for a long time. But no, look, Joe Biden played his own role in this. And I have to say, he was a little bit more careful than many of his progressive left. He never outright called to defund the police, okay? He never outright bragged about and praised these liberal prosecutors that have refused to do crimes. But he very much sent the message that he was on board with a lot of that. Certainly in terms of the actions his Department of Justice have taken, these pattern and practice investigations they've launched into police departments, the push that was made by him and Kamala Harris for some sort of sweeping, quote, police reform bill in the Senate, even though, by the way, Democrats ended up rejecting a very reasonable one from Senator Tim Scott. So very much was part of that attitude of hostility toward the police that followed the George Floyd episode, and also, some of the COVID fallout as well too. And the problem, and I think what Carter should have shown, is that once you get into a spiral of crime out there, it's very difficult to dig back out of it. And what makes this really disturbing is we know how to fix this, but we've now got too many policies in place that make that impossible.
Kimberly Strassel, let's conclude by talking about the end of the book, in which you preach Reaganism and Reagan's approach. Now, I lived Reaganism. I was in his White House. I know exactly what you're talking about. But when you talk about the ultimate happy warrior, that's available to anyone, from Donald Trump to Vivek Ramaswamy, from the angriest to the least angry. And that's not Trump and Ramaswamy, but whatever issue. Some people lose their temper sometimes and they get mad. Reagan only lost his temper once in the 1980 campaign. I paid for this microphone one time. Why do you think that works? But it's not popular among Republicans today. I have a theory, but I want to hear why you think it's been abandoned.
Yeah, I mean, it works because people want to be led to unity. They want to be led in a vision of this country that makes them feel better about themselves, their neighbor, their government, their general outlook. And I get at the moment that Republicans are angry about things that people have done on the Democratic side under this presidency. I get that most of these candidates feel that all that matters is that they show fight. But I disagree that that is the only way to win the nomination. And I also fundamentally believe that if you're not that happy warrior, if you don't talk about America as a people, then you can't ever invite in all of these people and grow your tent, grow your party, grow your movement. That's what Reagan did so beautifully. He was tough. He got his policies through, but he did it with a smile. And we need to see some more politicians who can do that.
And it was always more in sorrow than in anger when he had to fire the air traffic controllers. He didn't want to. He gave them plenty of notice. I always tell people, if you approach politics like you approach church, talk about it the same way, realizing there are deep divides in what people believe, and treat them with respect, it will work. But I don't know if the Republicans are going to figure that out. Joe Biden does not have that capacity. Now, you do not write this in the books. I just want to conclude our conversation about the Biden malaise by asking you, do you think Joe Biden will be their nominee? I mean, they stuck with Jimmy Carter because they had to, but Teddy Kennedy took him on, right? Teddy Kennedy took him on. Will there be a Teddy?
Well, I think it's 50-50 still, Hugh. I think if the president still continues to project weakness and ambivalence himself about whether or not he's running for the campaign, we could still get a challenger. And, I'm just amazed that we haven't had one already, because he's actually in a far worse position than Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter prevailed. I'm not sure that Joe Biden would, given his age, given the record. So I'm still waiting for a moment in which somebody surprises us and decides to take.
It's Gavin Newsom's for the taking, because he brings California to the table. And if he says Josh Shapiro is going to be my vice president and does away with the whole ethnic balance, racial balance, gender balance, and just goes with their best governor, who's Shapiro or Jared Polis, and with Gavin's electoral weight, he'll win the nomination. I can't believe he's going to pass it by. I mean, if you miss the window, you miss the window.
But notice, Hugh, he's effectively running a campaign at the moment. He's just waiting. And I think if there's any sign, it'll be a question of just how many seconds it takes him to announce.
Kimberly Strassel, congratulations. I love the Biden malaise. I hope everyone gets it. Again, 2 copies, one for yourself and your family, and then one for your favorite Democratic friend. Thank you for joining me, Kim. Good luck on the book tour, and be safe in New York. You never know what's around the corner.
Exactly. I'll be thinking of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.